South integration. As I mentioned at the beginning here, we will be distributing the slide deck and the recording of the webinar afterwards. So again, if you have any questions or have any kind of questions you would like to reach out to either myself or Rush with, please feel free to get in touch. But starting today, and what we're looking at for the webinar, just a couple of housekeeping items here in the agenda. Looking at a couple of the trading challenges since integration and since the go-live date on December 19th. So first looking at some of the barriers to trading and then some of the deterrents. Following that, we'll be taking a look at price drivers since the integration, a few interesting South constraints, and then taking a closer look at the beginning of January in the polar vortex case study. And then just a couple takeaways here to wrap up our webinar, especially looking at better predictors of the orca congestion, which has been one of the main constraints that we've seen since December 19th integration. And then also looking at some of the extreme weather this winter and what that might tell us about the summer. Quick summary here. Since integration, there have been challenges in trading the new MISO South region. One of the primary ones we have seen is the lack of an updated transmission map, which includes the full MISO region. A few of the others include a lack of available contracts for the new trading hubs in the South, and that included 3 new trading hubs: Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. Also looking at real-time pricing, we have been seeing strong real-time prices in the day ahead in all 3 of the MISO South hubs. And we also have been seeing a greater DART spread than what we've seen for Indiana hub in that same time period. Again, looking at a couple of interesting constraints in MISO South, the primary one being orca congestion, but also seeing some interesting splits between Addis to Tiger congestion and Grimes transformer. And then again, lastly here, looking at the future and accurately predicting the direction of that orca flow, especially as we near the spring and summer, when we start seeing some of those temperature spreads begin to widen. So again, looking at the trading challenges, a lack of a map. A lot of our current customers have been kind of looking at virtual congestion. And with a lack of that available transmission map, it does make it much more difficult in order to kind of figure out what constraints are hitting and what is causing them to do so. So again, we have been doing a little bit of piecemeal exercises here, using a couple different sources that we do have internally in the office to help kind of put that picture together and become a little bit clearer. But again, without that map, we do have that lack of transparency for the region, which does make it a little bit more difficult to look at that congestion pattern. We're also seeing a lack of available contracts on ICE. Not seeing anything available as of yet, just kind of looking forward to the summer and potentially seeing one of those 3 hubs start to trade a little bit more going forward. Now looking at some of the deterrents to trading, again, it's a little bit hard to trade when you are seeing these kind of unpredictable price swings, which we've certainly seen so far with that MISO South region. A lot of that having to do with the extreme weather that we saw in January, as well as some of that orca congestion, and trying to predict the flows of that line. So again, seeing kind of really volatile price swings. January 6th and 7th, we did see a lot of kind of up and down with those prices, and seeing about $600 swings. Keep your eye on how we can better predict and expect some of those flows. Additionally, we're not seeing any kind of clear impact of the integration on Indy Hub. Looking at several of the congestion patterns around Indy being independent of the integration since mid-December. So that does make it a little difficult to tell exactly what that new region is doing. One of the primary drivers of this kind of independent congestion that we've been seeing is that planned nuclear outage at the Palisades unit in Michigan, which has been kind of directly impacting flows between Indiana and Michigan. Now taking a look at the DART spreads in MISO South. Since the integration and looking at those values, on average, you have seen the real-time over the day ahead by quite a bit, especially in terms of Louisiana Hub coming in close to $12 since that integration. However, if you look at the median, you are seeing a little bit more coverage in the day ahead, although a little bit tighter here for Louisiana versus what you see for Indiana. Looking at the strength in real-time pricing, again, really contributing that to what we're seeing in terms of the congestion pattern that we'll get into in a little bit, as well as some of those strong demand days in the beginning of January, really kind of causing some fluctuations. Beyond that, looking at the pricing that we have been seeing on January 6th and 7th, and taking those out of the kind of context here, and just looking at a more normalized curve, what we have been seeing is the real time still coming in above the day ahead by close to $2 for Arkansas, $5 for Louisiana, and about $1 for Texas Hub. And the following slides are really just kind of a walkthrough of that. The top slide is including the January 6th and 7th volatility that we saw, and the bottom table here, taking that out of account here, just to kind of give a clear picture of what might be happening. So this is what we're seeing for Arkansas, for Louisiana, and what we're seeing for Texas. So now shifting gears a little bit and taking a look at major price drivers. Obviously congestion being the big player here. Since December 19th, we've seen about 90 new constraints posted internally to MISO South. Now again, there has been some overlap in the binding element, but again, just kind of keeping an eye on how those may crop up and affect prices on the 3 new hubs. 3 of the new interesting constraints that we have seen, the ORCA and reverse ORCA interface, and that's interface number 1. There are 3 separate ORCAs with connections between the South and the Midwest, but primarily seeing bind in the northern Arkansas corridor right now. Additionally, we're looking at ATIS to Tiger Congestion, seeing that drive strong negative MCCs on Louisiana Hub, and seeing positive MCCs for Texas Hub. And then lastly, we're going to touch upon some Grimes transformer congestion, usually looking at some positive MCCs for both Texas and Louisiana hubs. So looking at the ORCA 1 interface, again, we see the flows go in both directions. On the left-hand side there, you see ORCA interface, which is pushed from south to north. And then on the right, the reverse ORCA congestion coming in, and the Midwest pushing to the south. So what we're seeing there, first, the ORCA interface 1 is made up of multiple lines reaching over multiple voltage systems. You do see the Jim Hill to St. Francois 161 kV line, the Dells New Madrid 500 kV line, the San Souci to Shelby 500 kV line, and the Wolf Creek to Reliant CC 500 kV line. Now again, we do see fluctuation between both variations of the congestion in both the day ahead and in the real time. In the day ahead, when this line does bind, they typically include a direction north to south or N to S or S to N to kind of clarify which direction we're seeing those flows. Now, the drivers of congestion include temperature spreads, gas price spreads, and then the overall health of the MISO South supply stack. Next, looking at ATIS Tiger congestion, outages around Willow Glen being the primary driver of the congestion that we've been seeing in this area. And then we're also seeing this congestion aggravated by strong output from the nearby Big Cajun units, so kind of right on top of that constraint. Lastly here, some Grimes transformer, again adding some more volatility to both Texas and Louisiana hub, right on that Texas-Louisiana border. And what we see is a series of nearby outages since integration at Lewis Creek, Gosselin, and Crockett, helping to drive that. We're also seeing this congestion further aggravated by weaker output from gas-fired generation in Louisiana, which kind of instigates a pull from Texas eastward. So looking at the extreme weather and demand that we've been seeing so far since the December 19th integration, what we've been seeing in the brief time since the South has gone live is a lot of the extreme weather, again, driving a lot of new historic prices, I should say, within the footprint. On January 6th and 7th, that was really the peak of the colds that we were seeing. Just kind of for reference, temperatures reaching as low as 10 degrees Fahrenheit in Little Rock, Arkansas, 24 degrees in Houston, Texas, which we've been using as a proxy for Texas hub prices, and then also looking at 3 degrees in New Orleans. So again, what you're seeing is below freezing temperatures for an area that's really not kind of accustomed to that type of weather. What you've also looked at is peak demand reaching about 30 gigs in MISO South on its own. And with that, and taking a look at historical information, what we've seen is that kind of level is more in line with what we would expect to see on a summer peak day versus a winter peak day. Looking at the historical record, what we see is the nearest kind of load forecast to that day was June 27th of 2013 from MISO South, and that is from MISO published public information. Looking at that forecast, it was about 18 megawatts off from the actual load on January 7th. So again, you can see that the kind of curve that we're looking at and the strength in the demand certainly was there, and is certainly kind of not typical for this time period. Just to kind of further emphasize this point, you could see the temperatures really starting to appear for that 5th and 6th period, leading into the 6th and 7th. The temperatures coming down. Down here is the all-time low in terms of temperature record. So again, there is potential to see the temperatures get much colder. We haven't really kind of hit the bottom there, so something maybe to look for next winter should we see any sort of similar anomalies. At this point, though, I don't want to say that we are. But again, what we're also seeing is a little bit of interplay between the temperature forecast currently sitting here with the polar vortex, and then some of that Orca interface that we'll get into as well. But looking at January 6th and 7th, the 6th really being the peak for MISO South, what we were seeing in terms of those DART spreads was triple digits across the board here. Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas also all in the real time. Arkansas looking closer to 150, and then Texas a little bit tighter at 137. So a couple takeaways from what we've learned from this kind of extreme weather. First, the ability to predict which way the Orca interface flows will be going. As we saw the big price swings come in, about $600 MCC swings over the 6th and 7th, we're trying to relate that to macro trends that we're seeing in the footprint. So looking at the emerging pattern that we've seen far in the interface, we have learned a few things. One of the primary ones is that temperature spreads between the South, particularly using New Orleans as a proxy, and then looking at Illinois temperatures, definitely playing a role in deciding which way those temperatures are going to swing. If you take a look at the chart here at the bottom of the slide, what we had been seeing post-integration was typically the reverse Orca congestion, so the north flowing to the south. But as we start to see that cold snap take place in the Midwest, you start seeing the South actually helping out the Midwest in MISO Classic region and kind of pushing northward. So again, what we're seeing here is a couple of things. First, you've got to see cold temperatures help to drive a temperature spread. We've earmarked that spread at close to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we start seeing that pull away from the north to south and over more to the south to north. Again, other factors leading into that were the gas price spreads that we are seeing between Henry Hub and some of the bigger in the Midwest, including Chicago City Gates and Mishcon. Now, what does this mean for the upcoming 2014 summer? So looking at the high load levels in January, again, those spreads being a primary concern. However, looking at summer spreads in terms of the temperature, you normally don't see quite a big distinction like we did at the beginning of January. So our expectations is that you're really not going to see that help out as much. Instead, what you're going to see is kind of the health of the supply stack and some of those gas prices start to play a more primary role there. Again, though, prior to the summer, the spring is really kind of the time period that we're looking for this temperature spread to drive the directional Orca congestion, as we're expecting to see those spreads between Minneapolis and New Orleans and other points in the north start to really pull away, seeing the south start to warm much faster and helping to drive that south to north flow. So what this means for Indy Hub is that you could see a little bit more of those positive MCCs going into the spring, especially during maintenance season here. Again, if you look at this graph here, what we have, you can see those spreads starting to kind of come a bit stronger, January, February, March. As you get into the end of the spring, April, May, June, the spreads do start to get a little bit tighter. Most of the temperatures are sitting right on top of each other around the kind of 80-degree average point. Again, just for everyone's kind of benefit, since I did say we were looking at almost 90 new constraints, we have included the top constraints that we've seen, both by appearance and shadow price in the day ahead. Again, the Orca, as you can see, really kind of taking a lot of those top spots. Also seeing some of the fish in Newport, again, right around that northern Arkansas border, and relating to some of those flows as well. Then also looking at real-time congestion. Again, Orca pretty much across the board, although here we're seeing a little of that reverse Orca come in by appearance. Again, just because without those big temperature spreads, we typically see that kind of north to south flow right now. But that does conclude the prepared slides. If you do have any questions and you are able to kind of contact us here on the webinar, feel free to reach out directly to me at my email address here on the slide. If you do have any questions about some of those temperature and demand numbers, our meteorologist on staff, Jefferson Rhodes, is also available to field any questions, and his contact details are on the slide as well. So we're just going to take a minute here to review some of the questions that have come in. Otherwise, just hold tight and we'll get right back to you. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question here today is about the cold next week and whether you have any expectations of some of the constraints we might see there for MISO South.
Yep. So with the cold starting to build in again next week, what we've been seeing in terms of kind of the thresholds that we've set up in this presentation, we are expecting to see a return to the Orca congestion this week with the slightly milder load levels down in the low 80s in terms of kind of what we've been seeing in the current week, coming back up to the low 90s for next week. So some concern that Orca starts to play more of a kind of impact here on the pricing. And so again, looking for a bit more bullishness in terms of the impact we're expecting for Indiana Hub going into next week with the cold.
Thanks. The next question here is asking a little bit more about Orca and what the actual limit is on that line or that interface.
Yep. So with the Orca congestion, MISO post-integration or going into the integration did set an arbitrary limit on that line of about 2,000 megawatts. So just keeping an eye on that right now. There are a couple of contentious points surrounding the actual limit between MISO and SPP at the moment. What we are seeing is MISO reviewing the limit, though, at the 2,000 megawatt threshold and potentially seeing that revised ahead of the summer. Again, ahead of the summer means that you may see a little bit more flow going between the two kind of MISO main regions at this point, and that might, again, impact some of that interplay between the constraints, both the Orca and the reverse Orca.
The next question is talking about the LMPs for MISO South and whether or not we've noticed Texas Hub at a premium to the other two hubs, Louisiana and Arkansas.
For the most part, we have seen Texas Hub on the extremely volatile days at a slight premium. If I were to rank the three MISO South hubs, Texas does look like it is at a premium to the other two, followed by Louisiana, and then Arkansas being one of the weakest one, and a lot of that having to do with some of that Orca congestion coming in.
And lastly, this question is about the summer and whether or not we had any additional thoughts on it and the impacts there for MISO South.
Yep. So with the summer coming in, versus what we've been seeing in terms of that extreme weather in the beginning of January. With the much colder temperatures, you're operating some of those units and plants at a little bit more of an optimal level than what you would see in terms of those temperatures and the levels of output that you would expect for the summer. So there is some concern that you may not see as robust a stack as you did in the beginning of January in the south as you may going into the summer. So just keeping an eye on that and what that might mean. Again, continuing to watch the Genscape Power real-time interface. We are actively working on adding as many units in the MISO South region as we can to add some transparency to the region and kind of bringing a little bit more information there. So it is going to be a continued monitoring of that area in terms of that real-time output to see how we're seeing some of these units respond to the summer peak demand. All right, that looks like we've got all the questions here. Again, if you had any direct questions, please feel free to contact us here at Genscape. It's been a pleasure talking to you this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. And take care. Have a great afternoon. Bye.